April 7, 1945. The French landscape stretched out in deceptive tranquility, concealing secrets that would soon surface with devastating clarity. In this quiet theater of war's final act, one name would emerge that still sends shivers through military historians today: Curt Bruns. Before we dive deeper into this disturbing chapter of history, I need you to do something. Hit that subscribe button right now. This channel, Timeless World, brings you the most gripping, untold stories from history, and you don't want to miss what's coming next. Turn on notifications, because next week's story will shock you even more than this one. Now, let's continue. The man behind the crimes. At 35, Curt Bruns wasn't just another Wehrmacht captain swept up in wartime chaos. He represented something far more sinister: calculated evil wearing a military uniform. While thousands of soldiers followed orders they despised, Bruns exceeded his directives, crossing into territory where conscience ceased to exist. His reputation spread through whispered conversations among Allied intelligence officers. They pieced together fragments of testimony, each revelation more disturbing than the last. Bruns hadn't merely participated in war crimes, he orchestrated them with the precision of a conductor leading a symphony of death. The evidence painted a chilling portrait. American soldiers who'd surrendered honorably, trusting in the conventions of warfare, met their ends under his direct command. These weren't battlefield casualties or tragic accidents of war. They were premeditated murders, executed with methodical coldness that defied comprehension. What made Bruns particularly terrifying was his ability to operate within the system while corrupting it from within. He understood military protocols intimately and weaponized that knowledge to create scenarios where murder appeared justified through paperwork and procedure. His victims never stood a chance because he'd already engineered their fates before they even realized they were in danger. The capture. By April 1945, the Third Reich crumbled like a sandcastle before an incoming tide. German infrastructure collapsed, soldiers abandoned their posts in droves, civilians fled westward, desperate to escape the Soviet advance. Yet amid this pandemonium, Bruns moved with predatory stealth, believing he could slip through the chaos undetected. Allied forces had different plans. Intelligence reports pinpointed his location in southwestern Germany. Orders came down through the chain of command with crystal clarity: bring Bruns in alive. He would face justice, not battlefield execution. The arrest operation unfolded in pre-dawn darkness. Vehicles rolled silently along deserted country roads. Soldiers' hearts hammered as they approached the modest farmhouse where their target had gone to ground. Every man knew they were hunting someone who'd killed without hesitation or remorse. When they breached the door, Bruns offered no resistance. His composure was unsettling, almost supernatural. He stood calmly, as though he'd been expecting them, as though this was merely another scene in a play he'd rehearsed. Soldiers later described the experience as deeply unnerving. His eyes held no fear, no surprise, only a disturbing glint that suggested he considered himself above the consequences that governed ordinary men. The soldiers who arrested him reported something that stayed with them for years afterward. Bruns smiled slightly as the handcuffs were applied, not with defiance or bravado, but with what appeared to be genuine amusement. It was as though he found the entire situation intellectually interesting, as though his arrest was simply another data point in some grand calculation only he could understand. The weight of evidence. As investigators dug deeper, the full scope of Bruns's atrocities emerged with suffocating weight. They combed through military records, interviewed survivors, and documented testimony from witnesses who'd seen his handiwork firsthand. What they reconstructed was a timeline of deliberate murder that defied military necessity or wartime logic. 2 American airmen captured in France had been executed under his direct orders. The documentation was meticulous, revealing not crimes of passion or battlefield confusion, but carefully planned killings. Bruns had selected victims, designated executioners, and eliminated any possibility of survival. He'd weaponized military procedure itself, twisting it into an instrument of personal power. The investigation uncovered correspondence that revealed his mindset. In letters to fellow officers, Bruns discussed his actions with clinical detachment, describing executions as operational necessities and victims as security threats. There was no acknowledgement of humanity in his words, no recognition that he was discussing human beings with families, dreams, and futures he'd stolen. News of his capture rippled through Allied command. Journalists clamored for details. Military officials recognized the significance. This wasn't just another war criminal. This was a man whose actions embodied the calculated cruelty that had defied the Nazi regime at its worst. Survivors who'd witnessed Bruns's brutality came forward with testimonies that painted a picture of systematic terror. One soldier described watching Bruns calmly smoke a cigarette while prisoners were lined up for execution, displaying no more emotion than someone waiting for a train. Another recounted how Bruns had personally interrogated captives with polite formality before signing their death warrants with the same hand he'd used to shake theirs. The trial. Late April 1945 brought Bruns before a military tribunal. The courtroom atmosphere crackled with tension as he entered, spine straight, gaze unwavering. He carried himself like a man challenging the very legitimacy of the proceedings, as though he couldn't quite accept that rules applied to him.
Witnesses testified with devastating precision. They described how he'd selected victims with a strategist's cold eye, how he'd coordinated their deaths with meticulous timing, how even when confronted with the horror of his actions, he maintained an emotional distance that seemed almost inhuman. When given the opportunity to defend himself, Bruns didn't beg for mercy or express remorse. His response would echo through historical records for generations. "I followed orders as given. It was necessary for operational security. I did what had to be done." No tremor in his voice, no hesitation, no acknowledgement that he'd extinguished human lives with casual brutality. To the tribunal, his composure wasn't strength. It was arrogance, a chilling confirmation that he'd become a man who genuinely believed himself exempt from moral accountability. The proceedings unfolded with painstaking detail. Witnesses added layer upon layer of testimony. Maps illustrated the locations. Military orders were read aloud. Each piece of evidence reinforced what everyone already knew. The verdict was inevitable. Psychological tension permeated the courtroom. Victims' families sat in stunned silence, some trembling, others frozen in disbelief. Investigators whispered among themselves, sharing accounts of the fear Bruns had generated, the lives he'd stolen, and the complex mixture of relief and horror that he was finally contained. During cross-examination, Bruns displayed an unsettling command of military law and procedure. He challenged minor points with the precision of a legal scholar, not to prove his innocence, but seemingly to demonstrate his intellectual superiority. This only reinforced the tribunal's assessment. They were dealing with someone who understood exactly what he'd done and simply didn't believe it mattered. The verdict. When the tribunal reconvened to deliver judgment, the room practically vibrated with anticipation. Bruns entered as always, composed, erect.
Emotionally detached. He listened without visible reaction as charges were recited, crimes enumerated, and the sentence delivered. Death. No outcry, no pleading, no display of fear. Just the same cold demeanor, as if he'd calculated this outcome long ago and accepted it as inevitability. Even hardened military personnel felt the psychological weight of that moment. Justice, so long delayed, had finally arrived. Yet its arrival brought no celebration, only a grim satisfaction that consequences had caught up with cruelty. The lead prosecutor later wrote in his memoirs that sentencing Bruns felt less like victory and more like closing a wound that would never fully heal. The families in attendance wept quietly, not with joy, but with the exhausted relief of finally witnessing accountability after months of anguish and uncertainty. The final days. In his remaining days, Bruns maintained the same disturbing composure. Guards reported that he moved through the prison with measured calm, asking questions with curiosity rather than fear. He seemed fascinated by the machinery of justice itself, cataloging every detail as though studying a military operation. He asked about procedures, timing, and protocols, not seeking escape or delay, but satisfying some perverse need to understand exactly how his life would end. It was a final assertion of control over the one domain where he had none, his own mortality. The psychological intensity during this period was almost unbearable. Guards whispered about the weight of his presence, about sensing something both deliberate and inevitable in his manner. Even men accustomed to confront danger felt an unusual dread in his proximity. One guard reported that Bruns spent his final evening writing letters that would never be sent, documenting his thoughts with the same meticulous attention to detail he'd applied to everything else in his life. He ate his final meal methodically, thanked the guards with formal politeness, and slept soundly through his last night. It was this normalcy, this refusal to acknowledge the gravity of his situation, that disturbed witnesses most profoundly. The execution. The appointed morning arrived shrouded in oppressive silence. The entire facility seemed to hold its breath. Guards, officers, and witnesses moved through their duties with the awareness that they were participating in more than an execution. They were witnessing the closing of a dark chapter, the final reckoning of a man who'd believed himself untouchable. Bruns was prepared with clinical efficiency. He changed into standard execution attire without protest, walked to the chamber with measured steps, and observed every detail as though cataloging the experience for some report he'd never write. The execution chamber was stark and cold, stripped of everything except grim necessity. A small group of witnesses stood in silent testimony. The executioner, a man who'd performed this duty countless times, moved with professional detachment, yet even he couldn't entirely escape the psychological weight of this particular moment. As Bruns stood beneath the gallows, his expression remained one of detachment. His final moments contained no pleading, no regret, no last-minute recognition of the enormity of his crimes. He simply stood there, accepting the inevitable with the same coldness he'd once directed at his victims. When asked if he had final words, Bruns declined with a slight shake of his head. No dramatic speeches, no confessions, no acknowledgement of the lives he'd destroyed. Just silence. The mechanism engaged with brutal efficiency. One moment he stood there,
The next he didn't. The finality was absolute, clinical, devoid of drama. Yet the psychological impact reverberated through everyone present. The legacy. Witnesses later described feeling not triumph, but a complex mixture of satisfaction and unease. Bruns was gone, his capacity for cruelty permanently ended, yet his execution couldn't undo the harm he'd caused, or bring back the lives he had taken. The story of Curt Bruns serves as a disturbing reminder that evil doesn't always announce itself with obvious villainy. Sometimes it wears a uniform and follows procedures. Sometimes it maintains composure, even as it destroys lives. And sometimes justice arrives late, but arrives nonetheless. For families who'd lost loved ones to his calculated cruelty, the execution provided closure, but couldn't heal deeper wounds. For those who witnessed his final moments, the experience reinforced a sobering truth. The machinery of justice, though sometimes slow, ultimately reaches those who believe themselves beyond its grasp. Bruns wasn't just a war criminal meeting his fate. He represented the consequences of unchecked power, the dangers of ideology without conscience, and the inevitable price of moral corruption. His execution marked not celebration, but acknowledgement that even the most arrogant, the most detached, the most calculating individuals will eventually face reckoning. The broader questions. His death left haunting questions in its wake. How many others like him existed, hidden behind facades of normalcy? How many had committed similar atrocities believing they'd escape accountability? How many more chapters of calculated cruelty remained unwritten, waiting for their own moments of justice? The psychological intensity of Bruns's final hours illustrated something profound about human nature. Here was a man who'd orchestrated death with precision, who'd issued orders ending lives without hesitation, who'd confronted war's chaos with detached calculation. Yet facing his own mortality, he exhibited the same disturbing composure, demonstrating not courage, but a profound disconnection from normal human emotion. Military psychologists who later studied Bruns's case identified him as a textbook example of compartmentalization taken to pathological extremes. He'd created mental barriers so complete that empathy, remorse, and moral consideration simply couldn't penetrate. Understanding cases like his helps us recognize warning signs in others before atrocities occur. This is why you need to stay subscribed to Timeless World. History isn't just dates and battles. It's about understanding the darkest corners of human capability and ensuring we never forget the lessons they teach. Click that subscribe button if you haven't already, and hit the notification bell. Next week, we're covering another story that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about justice and morality. Don't miss it. The story of Curt Bruns isn't entertainment. It's education about the costs of allowing cruelty to flourish unchecked. It's a warning that justice, though sometimes delayed, carries inevitable weight. It's a reminder that every action generates consequences, and that history ultimately judges us all. In the end, as Bruns's body was removed from that execution chamber, one truth remained crystalline. Evil may thrive temporarily, but accountability always arrives. The price may seem high, but the cost of ignoring injustice is infinitely higher. His case continues to be studied in military academies and war crime tribunals as a cautionary example of how systems can be corrupted by individuals who understand them too well. The documentation from his trial helped establish precedents for prosecuting war criminals who claimed they were merely following orders, establishing that personal moral responsibility cannot be abdicated to military hierarchy. What do you think? Should justice always come, no matter how long it takes? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And remember, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and join us next week for another deep dive into history's most shocking true stories. This is Timeless World, where the past never stops speaking. Don't let these crucial lessons fade into obscurity. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this story, and
let's keep the conversation about justice and accountability alive.